So no, the 20% discount is fake, or it doesn't work like that. So it's actually an increase in purchasing power. Yeah. It's not a discount. And it's rather, instead of a first mover advantage, it's a last mover penalty. They even have a video I found on YouTube where this Google person looks like they're held at gunpoint, and they're like, no, you don't have to worry. I believe, and to me, the data supports that you will increase the temperature at the account level. You're going to turn up the heat. Welcome to another episode of Growing E-commerce. We've got a couple of exciting topics lined up for you today. First off, we're going to do myth busting about Google's CSS program. And in case you're not in Europe and you don't care about CSS, don't worry, we have something for you at the end. We're going to explain about how a specific thing we learned from the CSS program transfers to all of Google bidding. So stay tuned to hear more about that. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Mike Ryan, and with me, Chris.
Should I do some ads for Red Bull? No. Mike, great topics as always.
Yeah. Chris, what are you wearing?
Come on, man. I told you not to do it.
Why are you dressed like that?
Look. I want to defend myself here. We have a summer fest today.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I show up like, I don't know, 70s Miami Vice dude. But I love it, actually.
No, it's...
You love it?
You can pull it off.
Is it distracting?
I don't know how it plays on the cameras, if it's like breaking the cameras right now. There's like strobing and stuff. We're probably ruining the life of our production team over here. But
by the way, you are not high. This is the colors are real, right? I'm just saying.
Yeah. Is that because
what? No, come on. Let's move on.
Yeah, all right.
But I like it. And again, maybe it will be my new suit.
Yeah.
Would you be up for it?
Listen, you do you. I was in Google Dublin a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about like wardrobe vibe and what options do I have? Can I bring more options? I was like, I don't have a wardrobe.
What do you mean with options?
Yeah, it's like I have option A and option A.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs. He was always wearing, I guess, this black turtleneck, right?
I wear jeans and a t-shirt, and I have a very restricted color palette.
You're the Steve Jobs of e-commerce influencers.
Listen, I have other things to effing worry about. So
true that.
But yeah,
me too. But I still believe that my wardrobe gives me confidence.
Well, appearances do matter. So
yes.
Yeah.
And with that being said,
let's talk about, I have a segue here, Chris.
Okay.
Chris, let's talk about some false appearances. Wow. Myths.
Too smooth.
And the CSS
You're
program.
Too smooth, man.
Yes. That's why Google put me on the couch.
Ladies and gents, it was so fun. When we talked, because there's some prep going on. Mike gives me sometimes quite short notice the topics you want to talk about. And sometimes. And I was shocked that in the year of 2026, we are going to talk about CSS.
Yes. Well, there's a couple reasons why.
How come?
There's sort of three reasons why. So first off, the CSS program is back in the news because there are new rulings coming out, and actually, depending on when this episode airs, maybe already out.
The EU Commission is not done with the CSS.
Yeah,
they love that topic.
Yeah, exactly. Like because there's this kind of ongoing topic of the sufficiency of the CSS program and the measures that were taken back then, and that's definitely under fresh scrutiny.
Yeah.
Has been for a little while. So that's one of them. Another thing is that there are 15 new shopping countries coming out across Europe, and it's a lot. I didn't even know that there were that many markets left. as an ignorant American. Yeah. Well, the thing is, I did a little math on that, and all 15 sum up to about the size of Poland.
Okay.
So like the number 7.
Okay.
So by GDP. But that, it does offer upside, of course. And why this connects to CSS is that to advertise in Google Shopping in Europe, you have to advertise through a CSS.
Yes.
And by default, that CSS is Google's comparison shopping service, which is known as Google Shopping Europe or GSE. But of course, it's highly recommended that you advertise through a third-party CSS. We are one, by the way, and I'm not going to sell us exactly. But,
why not?
Well, I think we will sell ourselves because we're about to be
very truthful.
We're going to lift the veil. We're
Yes.
the most straight-talking CSS partner that you'll find. So there is that. But the other reason is just, I don't know why, maybe it's related to these, but I've just had this topic come up in multiple client conversations and having people in our team reach out to me lately, asking specifically about the multi-CSS strategy, which we'll explain. And again, I have a very specific viewpoint here. But
and the most important question is the 20% discount claim.
Yeah.
Real. And what's behind the 20% discount statement, right?
Exactly. Let's start there.
Let's start there.
So, and by first, because in case you're right now Googling our CSS, you'll see on our website that we talk about the 20% discount, which annoys me, to be honest, but I also understand from a marketing standpoint, because I had this conversation with our marketing department, and every single CSS on the market talks about the 20% discount, and you more or less have to. I disagree, actually, but it is what it is. So no, the 20% discount is fake, or it doesn't work like that.
I think this is the better explanation. Because of course, the CSS topic, look, it's really, it's fun and surprising that, again, 2026, we still talk about CSS. I remember the wild times when this whole CSS really was on the news.
It was insane,
It was insane. A crazy time. We were one of the fastest players in Europe to adapt to it. We created massive chances and opportunities for our clients. It was a fun time.
Yes.
Because you had a chance of being the first mover.
Yeah. There was a huge first mover advantage. It was a gold rush.
It was a gold rush. This, ladies and gents, listeners, that first mover advantage is gone. It evaporated because it's commoditized.
Yes.
However, there is still a claim out there that there is this 20%, let's call it the 20% click advantage, because I think this would be the more correct framing.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. Is it a discount? What is it? And is there an advantage at all? Let's break this down, because I think this might be one of the most interesting questions.
So basically what happened back then, just as a reminder, it's a long time ago, the European Commission ruled that Google is a comparison shopping, or that Google Shopping is a comparison shopping service, and that they were self-preferencing themselves through their organic results and advertising and stuff like this. Because back then, I believe a CSS could not participate in Google Shopping.
It was limited.
Google Shopping, So there was a major self-preferencing accusation, and it was probably well-founded. But so Google Shopping Europe had to split off as a rather
own entity,
as its own entity, and they had to demonstrate, they still have to, that they are independently profitable from Google. So as part of that, that's why I talk about you can advertise through Google Shopping Europe. If you make a shopping campaign and you don't have a third-party CSS partner, then Google is your CSS.
Exactly.
And because they are required to be independently profitable, they have to deduct a margin. And it's said to be 20%.
20%.
Yeah. We don't know. Maybe that's changed over time. I don't know. But it is said to be 20%.
By the way, maybe just what does that mean? I mean, we know what margin is, of course, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
I have a product and I bid 70 cents. What is the margin doing to my net bid, my real bid?
Okay. Yeah, well, that's at the heart of it. But can we choose easier math, Chris? Because I can't do 20%.
I looked at your face and I knew.
I'm looking at my head. I'm like, what's 20% of 70?
Should be 56. I get double checked on that. But anyway.
7 times 2, 14. 70 minus
56,
14.
56.
56. Okay. All right. 56.
So let's roll with the 70.
I'm not a mathematician.
But the 20 cent, the 20% margin, what does this do to my bid?
All right. So what happens? Because if you enter via Google default, let's say you have a euro bid.
Yes.
Please,
Yes.
from me.
Okay, got it.
You make a €1 bid.
Yes.
20% is deducted from your bid, and so 80 cents actually enters the auction. Yeah. And now, if you're doing it via third party, you enter that same €1 bid. There is no 20% deduction. You enter with the real €1.
Yes.
And so you can see that you didn't. There was no 20% discount, but rather your bid is worth 20 cents more relative to these other. So it's actually an increase in purchasing power. It's not a discount.
And this is why I think in general that the 20% click advantage, and we no one knows precisely if it's 20%, 18, 21, whatever. We did massive analysis on it, and it's hard to pin down. But you have an advantage, but the advantage is rather directed towards you can make more market because the net bid should be 20% higher. But you're not saving literal money.
No, and you have to remember, back then in the days of the first mover
the
advantage,
gold rush times,
exactly. So you had 20% more purchasing power, and also there was a lot of manual bidding going on back then, and everything was different. So this would, in principle, it could push you into a higher position within a given auction. It could also push you into different kinds of auctions than you were in before.
Broader search terms. So you would make market because your net bid, I don't know if it's the correct term, is higher.
Exactly.
You have to bid 20% less to get the same bid.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you'd have to bid 20 on Google Shopping Europe. You'd have to bid 20% more.
Yeah, exactly. So you have by default more purchasing power using a third-party CSS.
Yeah.
So is the claim which I'm about to make correct that as an online retailer selling products, you should have at least one third-party CSS in your setup strategy?
Well, now next I'm gonna take issue with the phrase "at least" in there. But
okay, you should have one.
You need to use
Okay.
We can say at least, but you need to use. I would use a third-party CSS.
Okay, because there is this click advantage,
and
CPC advantage.
Yes, and even now we have to think about it a bit differently because it is the year 2026. Everyone is using third-party CSS.
Do we have adoption rates here? I assume it should be around 85, 90%. It has to be.
It must be so high. Yeah.
All right.
It must be so high. And, that could be different now in these 15 new markets because there needs to be a whole cycle there. So again, we'll get into that in a sec. So it's the year 2026 now, and it's rather, instead of a first mover advantage, it's a last mover penalty because this, as you said at the start, this is all commoditized. Everyone's using this. So everyone has that same kind of basis. And it's rather, if you're only advertising through Google Shopping, you're at a disadvantage relative to anyone else. And also
framing.
All of the bidding by now is way more automated by Google. This is just the baseline. So it's really moved from a first mover advantage to a late mover penalty.
Right. Okay, I co-sign that. I love that. And the statement stands, you should have, in brackets, at least one third-party CSS because it gives you this... you make sure that you're not at a disadvantage with your CPC entering the auction.
Yes, if you're advertising purely through Google, you're at a disadvantage. There could be tactical applications of this. There could be a reason to use Google, but
May I come up with the second question now, man?
Okay.
Because, and I was, with you in the trenches in these early gold rush days.
Yeah.
And of course, there were a lot of strategies floating around. And one strategy was, let's go for as many CSS as possible.
Yes.
Because I can drive, let's call it market share, presence on the SERP. And I can remember that we always said, guys, even back in the days, and I don't want to pat on our shoulders, but we said, you should have the CSS running because this gives you this advantage, but don't be too granular because there are a lot of disadvantages coming with it.
Yeah.
So, question to you, Mike, share your open opinion. This multi-CSS in terms of having more than one third-party CSS.
Exactly.
Is this still a strategy to go with? What is your take on it?
Well, again, I hope there's someone working at CSS right now shaking their fist at me because then I've done a good job. Yeah, I like to.
I see it in your eyes.
I like to provoke people sometimes, but I said I'm going to just lift the veil here. So here's what happened with the multi-CSS strategy. At the beginning, there was a very material advantage because the 20% purchasing power boost was extremely tangible at that time. And in the earliest days, do you remember this? Google was giving like cashback incentives to advertisers.
Of course.
Because they needed to drive CSS adoption to satisfy the European Commission.
And you know the craziest shit? Back in the days, and by the way, I think the reason why we adopted our CSS so powerfully is because we were literally giving the click advantage 100% back to the client.
Yeah.
I can remember, man, there were some shady offers out in the market.
And this is what I want to talk about. Because it was price skimming. There was a material advantage. CSSs could charge a lot of money and often did charge exorbitant amounts of money. Even, we charge, for our commercials were different at the start than they are now.
But we had technical reasons because our product was able to manage multi-CSS.
Yes, exactly.
But pure CSS providers were just taking a big part of the share. Anyway.
So what happened, we had the bid mirroring. We had a lot of tech that we built around this back then. But anyway, what happened pretty quickly is that just the whole market just kind of collapsed. So pretty soon it was a race to the bottom on the CSS side. And it wasn't long before there was someone with like 100 euros a month flat rate, and then it was someone with like 30 euros a month flat rate.
60, 70, 50,
And I think now probably the going rate is probably like 30, 35 bucks per month flat rate.
Depending on the service level, but I think
exactly.
That's right.
And then what they try to do is upsells. They'll try to sell you into feed management services or stuff like this. So it's an entry point. It's just a thin, it went from a price skimming strategy to a thin wedge strategy. Told you I'm going to unveil things. And the other thing that happened is this multi-CSS narrative emerged. And the idea was that you could get more visibility by advertising through multiple CSSs. And in principle, the way that this would work is if these CSSs are very engaged with managing your campaigns the way that we were actually, I think, a bit of an outlier for doing that. But and they could have different bidding strategies. Maybe there could be some truth to that. You could at least apply different tactics or different advantages of different CSSs. But in reality, these CSSs just started making partnerships and just referring each other and all that kind of stuff. And so this was just a revenue expansion strategy among the CSSs, in my opinion, because the most prevalent claim is that advertising through multiple CSSs will enable or massively increase your ability to double serve. And we need to define that term a little bit. But basically that there could be a single search term and you would have a product
shown
appear
with two
from,
products.
Yeah, exactly. You get a product appearing from CSS-A, CSS-B, and CSPC and so forth. And that this would, this was kind of the main argumentation there.
And I know for a fact, Mike, and I think Google got way better at it because I mean, these were the talks of the town back in the days. And what Google basically claimed was there might be a double presence, but very importantly, it will never ever be the same product.
Yeah.
I can remember the early days where there were some loopholes and Google was not really bulletproof here. So you could force with, and by the way, I'm not talking about 7 CSS now because let's talk about the massive disadvantages having that granular of setup. But there were even loopholes where you could force Google to show the identical product for the same search query. But Google got better at it. So this double serving in terms of pushing one and the same product for the same search query, it's not possible anymore.
Yeah.
So this is a rumor and it's not possible anymore.
Well, exactly. Like, it's not legally possible.
Legally in the first place and technically Google.
Because, you're right. On a technical basis, Google has always tried to prevent, they call these offers, like when the exact same offer, so the exact same product, because if you appear on the same search term, it's because you might have multiple different products or different offers that are eligible for that search term. So it could be different Nike shoe, like models of Nike shoes or product lines or whatever. But the exact same shoe should never serve. And that's right. Google's technology wasn't as bulletproof back then. So maybe you could end up with this. Now they've gotten a lot better at it. And the main way people will do tactics in their feed, if you try to circumvent the system, You are just begging to get a disapproval. This is against Google policy. You will get disapproved.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
however, you can be shown with a different or similar product. But our stance on it is that it's not massively increased by the fact that you have a third-party CSS.
I'm here to tell you, or that you have multiple. I'm here to tell you that you can absolutely have different products appearing for one query. You can potentially dominate the entire board. We saw this with Temu back in the days because they were so aggressive on their bidding. Yeah. But that has nothing to do foundationally, that has nothing to do if you're using one CSS or multiple CSSs or which one you're using. It is just about your bid and your budget.
So the bottom line is the one third-party CSS makes sense on top to the GSE, the Google Shopping Europe, because there is this click advantage, or let's make sure that you're not at the click disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's the recommendation we have. But this multi-CSS strategies that you have third-party CSS A, B, C, D, that's not recommendable for one major reason, because you are splitting your data sets.
Exactly. Like, it's neutral at best, this strategy. I think there are very few cases where it's genuinely advantageous. It's neutral at best, and it's potentially a disadvantage because, you're splitting your data, and we're in the year 2026. You should not split your data.
You must not split your data. Or at least you shouldn't split it to a level where it's disadvantageous.
Every time that you split your data, there needs to be a clear reason
behind it.
Why. Yeah. Yes. And I don't think that multi-CSS is that reason.
All right. Man, we were quite clear on that.
Yes.
But there's another thing. Sorry to come. I don't let you go to the next topic.
Well,
I think it's a great segue to the next topic.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Yeah.
Or you.
Because it arises out of this. One thing that because CSSs like to pursue the multi-CSS strategy, there was another myth in the market there was a concern. Will I, if I'm advertising through multiple CSSs, will I bid against myself? And, I believe that I don't know what happened behind the scenes here. I wasn't one of the CSSs lobbying, but I believe that CSSs lobbied Google to make some very clear statements here about that because they like the multi-CSS strategy. I'm making enemies, Chris. Shit.
I will protect you.
Thank you.
And I look very dangerous with my shirt. By the way, it's not just a shirt, mate. It's also the fitting.
Oh, God.
All right.
Yeah.
I will do my best to protect you from some mad CSS CEOs.
Yeah, exactly. Or Googlers, who knows. I speak truth to power, man. So Google went out and has explicitly made this statement. They have a support page for CSS where they explicitly address this. They even have a video I found on YouTube where this Google person looks like they're held at gunpoint, and they're like, "No, you don't have to worry." But what they say is factual, but it really looks like hostage held video. But anyhow, so the point is, no, there is no bidding disadvantage in doing multi-CSS. You don't have to worry about that, in all fairness. Google specifies here that you will not second price yourself. Mm-hmm. And what that means, the way the Google auction works, just real quick if you're not familiar with it, should we do weird math, Chris, or should we do normal people math?
No, I did the weird part with the 70.
You're asking me 20% of 70.
Yes, man. I didn't want to shock you. Let's go with...
Man, I use AI to think now. I can't do math.
You have it in front of you. You could have used it. Let's use it. Use €1.
All right. So imagine that you have the first two bids or the highest bids in a shopping auction with two different, like CSS A bids €1.
Yes.
CSS B bids 75 cents.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the next competitor is at 50 cents or whatever. So the concern would be that if you second price yourself, CSS B would pay, or rather, CSS A, who won, would pay 1 cent more than CSS B. So they would pay 76 cents. Mm-hmm. And you'd have an artificially high bid because actually the nearest external bid was 50 cents. Mm-hmm. That won't happen. You'll only pay 51 cents. Yes. You'll pay more than the next competitor, assuming that your accounts are marked equivalent.
This is very important.
Yeah.
So there's this 1 cent incrementality rule.
Yes.
which, by the way, makes sense, and this is factually true.
Yeah.
So there's no bidding against each other threats by having a multiple CSS strategy.
And now I want to switch gears and take this and apply it to somewhere else.
Yeah.
To everyone who's not in Europe and didn't care about anything we just said.
Absolutely. And we have had a podcast about this, the ad rank, by the way, I still believe that the ad rank system is the one biggest reason why Google has become the most dominant online advertising company in the world.
Sure.
Or in general, the most dominating company in the world. Because the ad rank made sure that it's not just the CPC, which decides whether you are ranked first, second, third.
Yes.
Because there was this additional layer of, let's call it the ad quality in general, right? And this created this win-win-win. I got the good result as a searcher. The company was forced to create good ad content, but they could win even with less budget. And Google had the greatest product of all.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is now a new layer to it, or a new, not layer, but a new framing around it. And maybe you can elaborate it, because it seems like the ad rank, as we knew it, is more centered around the CPC than ever.
Well,
is this correct to say?
Yes and no. It depends on the exact context, and where that's very much the case is if we're talking about, because the problem is that Google is creating multiple technologies that are doing very similar work, and they offer multiple paths into the same auctions from multiple campaign types. And nowhere is this clearer or more present than PMax and shopping.
Exactly.
Because a large majority of your PMax clicks and costs are going to be shopping based. And to date, there is very little difference between a shopping ad served by PMax and a shopping ad served by standard shopping. That will change a bit, but it's another topic. So, we got confirmation about this from Ginny Marvin a ways back, because the question was like, all right, what are the ad quality factors and stuff like that? If you have a shopping ad from PMax and from standard shopping, they're targeting the same product,
same landing page,
same feed assets. The product title will be the same.
The ad is
so the ad will be the same.
Yes.
Like, what on earth is supposed to determine the ad rank besides the bid?
Yes, exactly.
And Google confirmed that the bid is the differentiating factor here. And
by the way, this is a big statement, because this leads to somewhere.
Well, yeah, and then they immediately follow up and say, but you will never self-compete against yourself. And it's true. You will not second price yourself, because what I was always trying to get at is, what does that mean? Are we talking about the same thing here? Because, okay, and now we found this documentation. You will not second price yourself. That's just a statement that I needed to understand what they're talking about. But I still don't think that prevents bid escalation.
Yes, because it's a systemic issue, I believe.
Yes.
I'm not that much technically involved as you are. But man, let's look at standard shopping and PMax, because this is the perfect example. And I'm talking about the shopping part of PMax. Very similar in what they do. I have these two campaign types in parallel. By the way, there were times Google was pushing this hybrid setup massively. This has changed a bit. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. However, I have these two campaign types. I have my budget goals and my ROAS goals. What these two campaign types are doing is to fulfill my ROAS and budget aims, right? Goals. If one campaign is eating into the other campaign, which is factually true, because it's mostly either or, what will the other campaign try to do? It will try to still apply to the goals I set, especially my budget goals. So it will do something to get this exposure, to get towards the goals I set. And this is where I'm like, this has to lead to some CPC inflation, because the CPC is the only thing to tell the Google system, hey, I'm the campaign who should be served.
Yeah, and
is it too simple of a view?
No, I mean, I think particularly if you follow some of the best practices that Google, or at least what Google says, like having looser return on ad spend targets, they're building whole new technology around this called smart bidding exploration.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and making sure you're not limited by budget. There are changes. They're focusing on these themes a lot right now, because there's big changes coming in both of those areas. But you know, I think also the looser your constraints are, the more problematic this is. But because what happens, like, okay, in this scenario where imagine your shopping campaign and your PMax campaign are the first and second bid, you're not going to second price yourself.
That's fair.
That's great. But how often does that happen? Then your bids were already high. The reality is, like, imagine that your PMax campaign is coming in first and your shopping campaign is coming in like third,
fifth,
fourth,
whatever.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Your PMax campaign is always going to win, or whichever one has the higher bid, it's just going to lead. And you can argue that that's a good thing, that you're getting higher, like you're getting the top position or a stronger position more often, and that's positive. But I would contend, like, I've actually, for shopping, I've never been a believer that being in the first position is particularly good, because yes, we read from left to right, at least in our reading system. It's different, but we read from left to right and stuff like that. But I don't think that people perceive shopping ad units that way. I think they tend to look as much like, I think it's great to be in the third or fourth position. You're in the middle of the screen.
Yeah.
You're in a very central spot. And I have the belief that, and I have some data as well, that although you might not literally compete against yourself, you're still at an account level. You're going to be escalating your bid because your higher bids will always be preferred.
Yes. Can we pull up this chart?
Yeah, I have two things here to show.
Mike, in the meantime, while you're looking up for the chart, maybe it's a stupid question, but I dare to ask it anyway. You're not second pricing yourself or bidding yourself, meaning that even, let's say, my standard shopping campaign has a bid of €1. My PMax shopping campaign has a bid of 50 cents. This will lead to, and I'm in first and second place, so this would lead that I'm only bidding 51 cents, right? Yeah. On the standard shopping campaign. What if, for whatever reason, the campaign with the lower bid wants to be in the first place? So because I can't force my campaign to always go for the second, third, or fourth. Then the new benchmark CPC is 51 cents. Could this just lead to a situation where my PMax campaign wants to be in the first place because the ROAS dictates it, the budget, and okay, let's go for 52 cents. So it's not this complete escalation, but this incremental upwards trend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I have no control over should it be the second, third, or fourth place. Yeah. So what I mean is, even if in this perfect world where I'm in first and second place, couldn't even that lead to this slight incremental CPC increase?
I mean, yeah, it's complicated, and I know
it's super complicated.
I'm not Google engineer,
but we don't get clear answers here. That's what I mean.
I think it is possible that because the algorithm is always learning based on the performance and what's going on, and I think that you could end up potentially, if you have these campaigns that are constantly competing against each other or cannibalizing each other, I think that could change what the algorithm learns. And I also think that Google's smart bidding works. It's very good, like at finding the right value per click and bidding
great
aggressively
technology.
enough. But there just becomes the question, like, all right, it identified a valuable click, but was it necessary that I bid that much for it, or could I have bid less and still gotten that, or still had a shot at that? And this, to me,
and still got a shot at it, has to include my own second shopping campaign.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. Or are these campaigns talking to each other? Like, and this is where I became a big Google fan, but this is where the transparency is missing, because if the bid is the one discriminator.
Yeah. I mean, it's anyway, I think we all know that it's worst practice to advertise at least to advertise the same exact products in PMax and shopping. Certainly if you have similar targets. If you highly differentiate the targets or the budgets or something like that,
then it could make
sense. Then it could possibly make sense. But if you have similar targets, you're going to get in this situation where it's ambiguous, and maybe you could have gotten the same for cheaper. So what I did here, in the first place, I looked at basically accounts that have shopping only, hybrid with PMax, or PMax only, and what happens with CPCs in these contexts. So what I see when I look at shopping only, the CPC range, and this is just a trimmed range. There's a huge, vast range, but it's between like 15 cents and 40 cents in this interquartile range. And shopping campaigns, as soon as they're in a hybrid environment with PMax, the floor doesn't change that much. It also lifts a bit, but the ceiling goes up to almost 60 cents. So it jumps from 40 cents to like 60 cents. And that merits investigation. When we look at PMax only, PMax has a range that is just higher than shopping. And we'll get into that in a second, because there are other things going on in PMax.
Makes sense.
But PMax has a higher range. And so shopping CPCs, when they are in a setting with PMax, they start to look more like PMax CPCs. And interestingly, what happens to PMax CPCs? They start to look, they get a touch better actually than PMax only, but they're still higher than shopping only. And, now the next question is, why are PMax CPCs higher in the first place? And I wanted to disentangle this a bit. So I have the next data point here. I look at shopping CPCs, PMax CPCs, and then shopping inside of PMax. And I can't tell you the reason why. I don't know, but it could just be, maybe shopping has a low anchor on it from a lot of people using manual bids, using max CPCs. There's something that's dragging it down. But shopping inside of PMax is indeed more expensive than shopping by itself. And again, I don't want to draw, this could also be people systemically, for whatever reason, set different ROAS targets for shopping than PMax. But for whatever reason, shopping inside of PMax tends to cost more. But the concern that I have is, in any case, in the hybrid environments, it looks like you do in fact increase your CPCs.
And again, theoretically, although you can't second bid yourself, theoretically it makes perfect sense, because the discriminator is the CPC. And I fully assume that each campaign on itself has an egoistic point of view to get the click. And in the worst case, when I have literally the same product catalog run by shopping PMax and standard shopping, then there is this competitive situation.
Well, and I think that although Google will never say out loud that this is happening, I think that they have tacitly or silently admitted it because of two things. But what do you want to say?
No, go ahead.
Well, first off, they were pushing hybrid setups for a while.
Don't do it anymore.
And now they're not doing that, from what I understand. So that's,
or at least, let's say, they're a bit more defensive about it.
Yes, but from what I understand, they are backing away from the go with hybrid PMax shopping setups. I think that strategy was useful for them a period of time. Coincidentally, we saw CPCs go up at a market level in that period of time. But now they're walking away from that, and there's
a new insight coming.
Yeah, there's a new insight. So there's the channel performance report for PMax, which lets you see your network reporting in there. And I have many criticisms of that. It's improved, but they're going to be adding something new down the bottom, I guess. It's going to be called Channel Diagnostics. And it's going to specifically help you understand your product overlap between PMax and shopping.
Why?
How would that have diagnostic value if there's no problem? Well, obviously there's a problem.
Yes.
And
the problem is rooted in, and the data we have proves it, different CPCs.
The campaign types just cannibalize each other, and you can't tell me they don't.
Yeah. And by the way, the cannibalization wouldn't even be a problem if we're talking about equal CPCs.
Yeah.
Because I could care less, right? It's a standard shopping ad on the SERP.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But it seems like that the CPCs are not equal.
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering, hold on. So this is, and by the way, I fully understand that Google is not 100% clear about it, although they try. Because Jean Marvin, shout out to her, but she told us, no, that's not what's going to happen. But for me, the explanation why it's not happening, the CPC inflation is missing.
Yes. Like I understand her point and the documentation that's available. You will not compete head to head against yourself in that sense. I got it. But I believe, and to me, the data supports that you will increase the temperature at the account level. You're going to turn up the heat.
And even if it's just incrementally, it's, depending on the volume you have to manage here, it might make a difference. Yeah. I think my final point, which I really believe in, is the hybrid setup. We have been talking about this way before Google basically came up with.
Yeah.
It makes sense, but you have to be careful about it. You have to have a strategy behind it. I think this is very important.
We have always talked about a separation of church and state.
Yes.
Basically, but having different products or having
different strategies.
Very different strategies.
Yes.
And
again, and we're open to talk with anyone who wants to challenge us on that. But it's an interesting topic. Again, maybe we have to keep an eye on it. We will for sure. And we'll have more talks probably with Google.
Yeah.
And by the way, we don't want to be, shitting on Google here by any means. It's just that it's not logical.
Yeah.
Why there shouldn't be this increased temperature?
Yes.
To quote you.
Not the first time you quoted me, Chris, but thanks again.
Actually, true, man. Do you quote me sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Definitely.
Then I'm fine with it. I enjoyed it, man. As always.
Likewise. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been another episode of Growing E-Commerce. As always, you can find us at smarter-ecommerce.com. And if you like this episode, please give us a shout out on social media, wherever you are. Leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Subscribe on YouTube. Do the stuff. Thank you very much.
We're off to the summer party now.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's do it.